We have more in common than we sometimes allow.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in House of the Dragon, Episode 8.
Hey, welcome back.
I never left. I was sleeping under the counter, but thanks to Brian Silliman for covering for me while I was napping. So this episode begins with yet another time jump, this time 6 years, meaning that the show's first season has spanned 21 years, 30 if you count the prologue. Now we actually have a video coming out tomorrow about this, but I personally feel like this has been a tad rushed. We're introduced to adult Laena in the same episode where she dies. We never get to see the repercussions of Criston Cole's murder of Joffery. I guess I just dig this so much that I want to see more of it. Let me know if you think the time jumps have been excessive down in the comments below. Now, first of all...
What are you doing?
Oh, nothing. Sorry, just a little bit of crossbreeding. Now, let's talk about this episode.
Now say do what now?
So, we pick up 6 years after Aemon lost his eye and Laenor faked his death. In his grief, Corlys Velaryon left his island to fight, once again, in the Stepstones. The Triarchy are the herpes of Westeros, constantly re-emerging no matter how many times you try to wipe them clean.
Like that U2 album they put on everybody's iPhone.
Yeah, you know, I still can't get that thing deleted. In Corlys' absence, his wife Rhaenys has been sitting on his driftwood throne. Now, I don't know if it's actually made from driftwood, but it was a gift from a sorceress named Ursula Upcliff, who ruled Witch Isle here near the Vale. The throne was supposedly a gift from the god the Merling King, a god associated with the Narrow Sea. Now, because the gift came from a sinister sorceress like Ursula, it may have carried a curse, and this curse may have spelled out the doom for the Velaryon house, a doom that seems to be accelerating in this episode. Corlys has sustained some pretty bad wounds in the fighting, and now he's taken a fever and will soon die. He has his own Daemon-like hot-headed brother, Vaemond, who you'll remember he disagrees with during the battle against the Crab Feeder.
Blood or no, Vaemond, I will not have you stoke mutiny.
Now, Vaemond wants the Driftwood throne for himself, so his house isn't led by a child who is obviously not even of his own blood relation. It's not like an unreasonable request, but there is more at stake here than the ships of the Sea Snake. Corlys told Jace that he was going to be his heir.
It's your birthright, lad.
And if these kids are passed over, then that's basically the crown, acknowledging that Rhaenyra's kids are bastards. And if the kids aren't trueborn, then it means Rhaenyra isn't fit to be queen. When we hear,
but it's not a king who sits the Iron Throne these days, it's a queen.
You might think for a moment that Rhaenyra has been crowned during the time jump. No such luck for her though, as Alicent is now the de facto queen regent, ruling in place of Viserys Targaryen.
So she's like Edith Wilson?
Who's Edith Wilson?
Edith Wilson, man. Woodrow Wilson had a really bad stroke, and then his wife Edith was the only person who was allowed to see him for like months and months. So she basically ran the country during that time. Read a book, dude.
I would, but there are no books here. Only movies. So many movies. Elsewhere on Dragonstone, Daemon gets an egg from a clutch neatly laid by Syrax, that's Rhaenyra's dragon. His plan is to place the egg in the crib of the child that Rhaenyra is carrying. Everyone has that ultimate goal to be a dragon rider, like in the Neverending Story or in Rick and Morty.
So cool!
I mean, we already saw Daenerys' dragons slowly level up, but now it's great to see the Targaryens at the zenith of their power, and seeing how the family members imprint onto these dragons.
Dracarys Vermax.
Yeah, I wish I could raise my own dragon like that.
Well, Doug, now you can if you play Dragon City, a really fun mobile game that is the sponsor of this video. This game combines all of my favorite aspects of different mobile games. See, I love games where I have to design cities and upgrade buildings, and in Dragon City, you have to place farms, hatcheries, habitats. Also, you can collect over 1,000 unique dragons to build up your own dragon empire. You raise your dragons by growing food and upgrading them with gold while upgrading and personalizing your city. But where the game gets really unique is that in order to grow your floating sky empire, you have to crossbreed dragon species, then evolve your baby dragons by feeding them.
Just like Daenerys did.
That's right. But the game really takes off in the combat arena, where you teach the dragons new attacks so they can become more powerful. And you can fight the computer or play against your friends in the player versus player mode. Now, you and your friends can also join an alliance to unlock even more rewards. Plus, there are weekly minigames and daily rewards that make it very easy to level up fast. And when you play, you'll also find dragons of some of my favorite YouTubers like Mr. Beast, George Not Found, and Sniper Wolf. And now, characters from The Walking Dead are coming to Dragon City with all new Walking Dead dragons. So, I highly recommend you try out this game. It is a lot of fun. Download Dragon City by clicking the link in the description or scan the QR code and get a special free starter pack with 15,000 food and 30,000 gold plus the epic zombie Terra Dragon. Trust me, you're going to want that golden food when you start leveling up your dragons. Now back to the Easter eggs. Baela is one of Daemon's twin daughters that he had with Laena, and she was named after Viserys' father, Balon. Now that is also the name he gave his infant son, who was the heir for a day in the first episode. Baela has sent Daemon a message from Driftmark. Now, she has been staying there with her grandmother, raising her as a ward. Kind of like how the Starks raised Theon Greyjoy, except he was more of a hostage. The message reads, "Father, I write this with news of Uncle Vaemon, who this moment sails to King's Landing. He plans to appeal to His Grace the King on matters of succession, rights, and the sanctity of his blood. He wishes for the Driftwood throne to pass to him, that is his by rights, and that he is the only untainted choice." Elsewhere at Dragonstone, Prince Jacaerys is studying his Valyrian.
Killed.
Felled. It is a related word.
He's retelling how Aegon and his two sister wives traveled from Dragonstone to Blackwater Bay and founded the city of King's Landing. This also mirrors the journey that Rhaenyra and her family will take in this episode, as they travel from Dragonstone to King's Landing.
To King's Landing, then.
So he's having a hard time learning this language, maybe because he's got that strong blood in him, so learning High Valyrian doesn't really come easy to him.
Or he could just be dyslexic.
Yeah, like Theo Huxtable. Now, he is learning on this huge table. Now, this might be the same table that's a map of Westeros that we've seen in Game of Thrones before. That's the table where Aegon planned his conquest of Westeros, and then Stannis used it in the War of the Five Kings, and then finally Daenerys used it here.
Shall we begin?
Now, in the book, this is called the Painted Table, and it's 50 feet long, so the show is already taking liberties with where the table sits and its size. So a lot of people have been saying there's no one to root for on this show, but you gotta respect this kid's work ethic.
No, I want to keep going.
The next part of the story is Aegon ordering the trees to be felled.
Aegon ordered that the tree should be killed.
This is because when he arrived in Westeros, there was only a fishing village where he landed, and he ordered a great wall or palisade to be built on the highest of the three hills that eventually became King's Landing. So most of the first chunk of the episode is all catch-up as we learn that Daemon and Rhaenyra are married, and that Rhaenys blames them for the death of her son. Rhaenyra no longer even resides in King's Landing because she got tired of Alicent's drama, and instead she lives in her ancestral home of Dragonstone. And now Daemon and Rhaenyra have a son, Aegon.
But wait, Alicent named her son Aegon.
Yes, and in the book, this also pisses off Alicent because she sees this as Rhaenyra's Aegon stepping on the toes of her Aegon, who remember she thinks should be next in line to the Iron Throne. The family returns to King's Landing for the first time in years, where they are given a pretty piss-poor welcome, much like the diss that Corlys showed Viserys, a kind of high society Westerosi way of disrespecting nobility. Then we go to Alicent presiding over the small council, and the shot begins on the seven-pointed star of the seven gods of Westeros. As Daemon points out, Alicent is slowly replacing Targaryen banners with more iconography from the church.
The removal of Targaryen heraldry and the installation in its stead of various statues and stars.
Alicent making this change is significant for a number of reasons. For one, when Aegon conquered the Seven Kingdoms, he had to spend a lot of time courting the church because they did not approve of him having two wives, especially since his two wives were his sisters. The church did eventually approve of the Targaryens' incest because they ruled that the Targaryens were more than just mortals, so they had to keep their bloodline pure. Anyways, the Targaryen family has always had an uneasy relationship with the faith. Alicent has become even more closely aligned with the faith because it helps present her family as the pious alternative to the sinful Rhaenyra, who is raising bastards to be heirs to the Iron Throne. Alicent is even wearing the Faith of the Seventh Star around her neck. Now, I love this detail because it shows how, if she ever needed to rally support, she would be courting the allegiance of the church, which makes sense because her house, the Hightowers, are located in Old Town, where the Church of the Seven is also headquartered. Careful though, Alicent, because we've seen what happens when a queen tries to use the church as a political tool.
Shame! Shame! Shame!
Alicent is still wearing green, the color the Hightowers wear when they call their banners, and notice that Rhaenyra is wearing black. Now, their confrontation at court was often referred to as the Greens versus the Blacks. So Daemon and Rhaenyra are in King's Landing to make sure that Rhaenyra's son inherits the Driftmark, so they appeal to what's left of Viserys.
Yeah, but why does he get to decide?
Because the Iron Throne breaks all ties except for combat. So the model of Old Valyria is now huge because Viserys has been working on it for decades. But it's telling that while this model is strong and sprawling, Viserys' own body is weak and shrinking. He was always a ruler who pined for the days of old rather than working to make sure his ties were strong in his own kingdom in the present day. And it is crazy how some characters, like Matt Smith, have aged like Bilbo. Whereas Viserys looks like he found the One Ring and he's forgetting the taste of bread. It's also interesting that Viserys is now wearing frilly, bright clothing and what looks like a woman's blouse, and he's being forced to stay in bed. It's almost like he's being forced into the traditional role of Westerosi women, who are treated as brood sows for royal seed. He can serve the realm best from his bed. So this whole scene reminded me of Alicent in bed with Viserys, as she had to let him do his duty with no regard for her own pleasure. Alicent, meanwhile, is hearing a story from one of the handmaids about how her son Aegon raped and assaulted her.
I didn't see him. I asked him to stop, Your Grace.
I really do think that Alicent feels bad for this girl, but that she's more angry with her son. But see, like Cersei, she's willing to accept her son's horrible actions because she loves her kids.
You are my darling boy, and the world will be exactly as you want it to be.
You love your children. It's your one redeeming quality, that and your cheekbones.
She pays the kid off and gives her moon tea like what Rhaenyra was forced to drink after her dalliance with Criston Cole. Aegon II, meanwhile, is now married to his sister Helena. Now you'll remember that up until now, she's kind of been on the margins and just treated like a weirdo.
This one has 60 rings. And 2 pairs of legs on each. That's 240.
I can relate. But Helena seems to have a gift of prophecy. She's always muttering weird stuff.
The flesh, weaving dragons of thread.
And this statement very much came true when she predicted that Aemond was going to lose his eye.
You will have a dragon one day.
He'll have to close an eye.
Now look, I've held off on pointing these things out because I don't want to spoil anything that happens in the book, but she does appear to have a gift to tell the future, which also many Targaryens seem to have. Aegon foresaw the Long Night, and that one of his heirs would unite the Seven Kingdoms to fight off the zombie apocalypse, and that heir turned out to be Aegon V, aka Jon Snow. And in the House of the Undying, Daenerys also had visions of the Iron Throne covered in snow. And in the books, Jon also had a couple of prophetic dreams himself. So the boys return to the fighting yard where they were trained, and at first their memories are warm and nostalgic.
Smaller than I remember. It looks exactly the same.
But then we see just how much Aemond has grown, as he can now stand toe-to-toe with the seemingly immortal Criston Cole. Seeing Aemond fighting in the yard probably brings up a lot of trauma about how the older boys bullied them, and of course the fight where Aemond lost an eye. In the original Game of Thrones, we kept hearing this phrase.
They say every time a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin and the world holds its breath.
And this is pretty true, all the way back to Aegon's conquest. There's always a nice Targaryen and a cruel one. Aemond is one of the cruel ones, although Daemon seems to have matured quite a bit, so maybe you can grow out of that phase. When Vaemond enters the castle, the knights escorting him are not wearing the sigil of House Targaryen. They're wearing the symbol of the High Towers, showing just how much control Alicent's family now has of royal court. So then we come to Rhaenyra's low point when she tries to convince Rhaenys, a would-be woman queen herself, to secure her own ascension to the Iron Throne by basically endorsing her children as the heirs of Driftmark. When she says,
I loved your son.
Now we all know this is true. In fact, Rhaenyra loved him so much that she will honor him by keeping the secret that he is alive, even though if she were to tell Rhaenys, it would actually help her own political ambitions. So this is Rhaenyra's low point in the show, and the next scene might end up being the most pivotal in the entire series. She appeals to her father directly to specifically ask if he truly believes in Aegon's prophecy about the Song of Ice and Fire.
The Song of Ice and Fire, do you believe it to be true?
Now this talk inspires Viserys to pull a Grandpa Joe.
I haven't done this in 20 years.
10 seconds later.
I'm gonna call this chance to make my way.
But also, this is the conversation that Viserys will carry on with Alicent later, as he's high as hell and rolling on milk of the poppy. But more on that in a bit. In this talk, I was surprised that Rhaenyra called out her dad for naming her heir, because it actually ended up endangering the realm.
By naming me heir, you divided the realm.
So in the book, which is kind of written from like a point of view of people who weren't there, they don't explain anything about this Song of Ice and Fire prophecy. All we know is that Viserys stood by his daughter and that she fought very hard for the throne. In fact, when you read the book, at times it seems like they're both just being stubborn, and that it would have been way easier to just name Aegon heir. So this addition about a personal Targaryen prophecy that connects to Game of Thrones is what makes this show work so well. We can root for all of these characters because each of them believes that they are acting for the good of the realm and not on behalf of their own lust for power. Something about this meeting sinks into Viserys because he plans for one last dinner with his family.
Want us to dine together.
And when he asks for this, notice that Otto immediately calls for milk of the poppy because he wants to keep the king weak and drugged up so his daughter can keep serving in his place. Then he makes a heroic entrance to sit on the Iron Throne one last time. This is one of the few times when Viserys sits on the throne and doesn't cut himself. Now, it's implied that his sickness stems from the many cuts from the throne, like maybe they got infected. See, the reason Aegon wanted a throne of swords was so nobody would sit too comfortably upon it. Because when you get too comfortable, your kingdom becomes like the body of Viserys, a rotting, weak husk. So Viserys does stumble, and we get this sweet moment where Daemon helps him with his crown. It's kind of hard to watch this and not think of this king.
Why should I welcome you?
But Viserys does come through for his daughter, daring anyone to challenge the blood of his grandsons.
The matter settled. Again.
Vaemond does speak up, and Daemon just makes it easier for Viserys to cut off his tongue. Now, after this, Viserys collapses because he is inherently a peaceful man, and conflict makes him weak. Remember how he could hardly even stomach killing the stag. The rancor of his court and kingdom eat away at his soul, as symbolized by how it eats away at his body. Later, Rhaenys is preparing to bury her brother-in-law and says,
"Stranger has visited me more times than I can count, Grand Maester."
So the Stranger is the name that the Westerosi called Death. There was a statue of the Stranger in the Great Sept of Baelor, but it was facing the wall, as is customary, to symbolize that the Stranger won't visit people who are in the company of the Seven. And then, of course, this happens. So then we go to the family dinner, the moment where the Targaryen dynasty hangs in the balance and is nearly reforged. This scene was a masterclass in dialogue, political manipulation, family relations, friendship, and hatred. The emotion at the table moves in several different clearly defined phases. Alicent, ever pious, begins with a prayer to the Seven, asking them to mend their family, and her prayers are almost answered.
May the smith mend the bonds that have been broken for far too long.
So then Viserys removes the mask of gold that he wears. Symbolically, this is him removing the trappings of his throne. He is revealing himself not as a monarch, but as a father and a grandfather whose days are numbered. His family listens to him out of love. For all they know, every single word he utters could be his last, and they hang on his every word.
Tonight, I wish you to see me as I am, not just a king, but your father, your brother, your husband, and your grandsire.
The flesh is rotting away from Viserys' face, symbolizing the rot of his kingdom. Now he's basically reduced to like Gus Fring and Two-Face combined. But his outpouring is real, human emotion, and it cuts to the hearts of these two women. Suddenly, matters of succession and thrones don't feel as personal as the feelings of this old man that they both love. Rhaenyra has always wanted to make peace with Alicent, so she toasts first.
I must admit that no one has stood more loyally by his side than his good wife.
And she means every word. Alicent knows her friend and knows that her husband wants to see them at peace before he dies. Hate's a very heavy burden. When you decide to hate a thing or a person, that's a burden that you carry around with you. Hating is hard. So Alicent decides that it's time to let go and forgive.
You will make a fine queen.
But the problem is, the parents have already poisoned their children against each other. Well, all right, mostly the Hightowers have, but still. Remember, when Aegon was a teenager, he didn't care that Rhaenyra was going to be queen.
Rhaenyra will ascend the throne, and Jacaerys Targaryen will be her heir.
So? But his mother taught him to be mean and cruel.
She can move to cut off any challenge to her succession.
Then I won't.
You are the challenge! You are the challenge, Aegon!
Alicent and her allies at court taught Aemon to look down on the boys for being bastards. See, no one is born hating someone. You have to be taught to hate. And hate, especially for young teenage boys, can be very seductive. Hate makes you feel powerful.
Good.
Aegon tries to dampen the mood by teasing Jace, but this heir to the Iron Throne holds his composure.
You can play the gesture if you wish, but hold your tongue before my betrothed.
He even hits on Luke's betrothed, Baela.
If you ever wish to know what it is to be well satisfied, all you have to do is ask.
And look, I just gotta say, in the book, Baela's she's way more like Arya Stark. She keeps her hair short so it doesn't whip in her face when she rides her dragons. She's a tomboy, she loves to fight, and she has a pet monkey. I want to see the pet monkey. But Aegon's insults go nowhere when his wife Helena cuts him down to size.
It isn't so bad. Mostly he just ignores you. Except sometimes when he's drunk.
So Jace, ever classy, dances with Helena as a way to show that he is classier than Aegon and will actually end up being a better husband. So it seems like even the boys can't kill this mood. until Viserys becomes ill and leaves the table. This is a bad omen for how the kingdom will fall apart after his death. Immediately, the party starts to unravel, but it's because of the boys, because their parents have taught them to hate one another. Luke stares at Aemond one-eye, and Aemond really feels embarrassment and rage from this. He's reliving the moment when he lost his eye, and he cannot resist getting in an insult.
Let us drain our cups to these 3 strong boys.
And the ensuing fight is so tragic because Rhaenyra and Alicent are forgiving each other. They're ready to move past their rivalry. But now Rhaenyra feels like she's got to hurry up and get her sons home, but she promises to return.
Let me see the children home. I'll, return on Dragonback.
If the boys hadn't fought, then Rhaenyra would have likely stayed a little longer by her father's side, mending fences with Alicent.
The king and I would both like that.
See? She missed her friend. Deep down, she's still that sweet girl who reads folktales in the Godswood and chipped away at her own nails. And then we catch up with Mysaria, Daemon's former paramour from earlier in the season. It looks like she's the new mistress of Whispers. And likely she's the person who told Otto about Rhaenyra and Daemon gallivanting through a whorehouse in Fleabottom. Her informant is the chambermaid that Alicent dismissed from her meeting with Larissa Clubfoot a couple episodes ago.
Tell you not now.
So, if this is true, if Mysaria ends up being the one who ratted on Rhaenyra, then she is one of the most crucial characters in this show. That night with Daemon is what set Alicent against Rhaenyra, because deep down, she was jealous that the princess got to do whatever she wanted. And finally, this entire series turns out to be like a giant episode of Three's Company and hinges on a simple misunderstanding. Viserys is tripping balls on Milk of the Poppy and he mistakes Alicent for his daughter.
Kinda creepy.
Very creepy. Alicent is also sitting on his side where he doesn't even have an eye, so he can't even see her. And yet, she just assumes that he's addressing her. This is because for years, she has overinflated her own importance at court, running King's Landing in Viserys' place. Viserys thinks that he's answering Rhaenyra's question from earlier.
Don't you remember his dream? The Song of Ice and Fire.
He tells her,
The prince
It's Aegon.
came back the realm.
And Alicent assumes that he means her son, Aegon. In fact, he means Aegon V, Jon Snow. So now, both Alicent and Rhaenyra believe that they are somehow destined to unite the realm against a great evil. Or, at the very least, Alicent believes that this is the will of King Viserys. I mean, think about how well crafted this is. If the dinner had gone just a little differently, if Joffrey hadn't stared at Aemon's missing eye, then he wouldn't have exploded. The fight wouldn't have started, and maybe it would have been Rhaenyra and Alicent putting Viserys to bed together. Instead, a mixture of egos, pride, love, and pity will lead Alicent into thinking that her son is destined for something great. The episode ends with Viserys, who is basically a living skull, gasping deep, deep breaths, and maybe breathing his last breath. And he says,
No more.
And let me know what you think about Viserys' final words down in the comments below.
And now I challenge you to the death!
What? But we're best friends.
No, dum-dum. I got my own little dragon city, and I want my dragons to fight your dragons. I got a dragon named Emery, and he is fierce.
Alright, I see. You're on then. So just a reminder to check out Dragon City and their new Walking Dead dragons with a link in the description, or scan this QR code to get your starter pack. That's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let us know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.